Welcome to Farm Your Daily, a field forward podcast. I'm David Geiger, your host. Today on Farm Your Daily, we're going to take a look at the weather. It's been wet for a couple of months, but there might be some changes ahead. A conversation with Justin Glisan, our state climatologist, as well as we chat about the marketplace with John King of the Ground Level Dispatch. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Your Daily. And joining me on Farm Your Daily, we have our state climatologist, Justin Glisan, here in Iowa. Justin, always good to be chatting with you, and we are nearing the end of the month of August, and I wanted to catch up a little bit because, as we talked about last time, June and July were very wet, and it feels like August really wasn't too different. What are we seeing so far in this month of August?
Yep. So, David, nice to be with you again. Wet has been the signal for this summer, particularly late June, second wettest July on record, only behind 1993, the Great Flood year, about an inch and a half below that record. We've started wet in August. We're above average across much of the state, except for southeastern Iowa, slightly below average. But overall, we have had timely rainfalls. We've had much above average rainfalls across portions of the state. You look at some stations, north central, central, and eastern Iowa for July, wettest July on record, and in the top 10 wettest months of any month for those stations going back into the late 1800s. So, yes, wet has been the story.
Justin, as we are looking into this month of August, then what are the trends? Because I felt during the fair it was unusually. I know Iowa's humid. I know it's tends to be a bit steamy in August, but it felt unusually humid and steamy.
And that was the story. So it wasn't so much those air temperatures, it was the dew point temperatures or the amount of moisture in the air. We had high relative humidities, temperatures in the mid to upper 80s, in some 90-degree readings as well through the length of the state fair. But if you look at days in which the dew points have been below 65 degrees and days that the dew points have been above 75 degrees, so those really muggy days, where we've seen an anomalous pattern establish is strong southerly flow, and that's really imported a lot of moisture from the Gulf. We've had monsoonal moisture from the Pacific, and that's where we get a saturated atmosphere. So if you do work outside, you're sweating. That sweat does not evaporate. You're not cooling off your body, and that's definitely what you felt if you were outside at the state fair for several hours, just the amount of moisture in the air.
What are we looking at as we do get closer to harvest? I know we're still probably about a month out for a lot of folks, if not a month and a half or so, but what are you looking at now in terms of those early forecasts?
Yep. So we talk about teleconnections here. We talk about El Nino and La Nina. The updated outlooks for what phase we're looking at as we go into harvest in wintertime. It's looking like we have a higher chance of La Nina conditions redeveloping within that September, October, November timeframe, and then going back into neutral conditions in winter. Now, if you look at behavior, of course, a lower correlation between those phases in the warm season to weather that we expect because of thunderstorm activity. But we're transitioning now and into September and October from thunderstorm-driven rainfalls to those larger scale low pressure systems that bring widespread rainfall. If you look at the last 30 years of behavior, if La Nina conditions do form, we do see warmer and drier conditions typically. That's excellent news in terms of harvest, getting the crop out of the field, but also dry down in the field as well. So given how wet it's been, seeing a warm and dry signal as we get into September and October would be ideal. Now, if you look at the short term, end of August, getting into the first week of September, we're going to see a significant shift in the air mass that we have over the upper Midwest across much of the eastern United States, in fact, towards cooler temperatures and then near normal to drier precipitation chances as we look in the next 8 to 14 day window. So a much needed shift, get those dew points down, get some evaporation going on. This has been the first week in a year in which we've been drought or abnormally dryness free on the U.S. Drought Monitor again, a reflection of how wet we've been this summer.
Great minds think alike. As you were speaking, was reminded that the drought monitor came out today, and I just took a quick glance at it. Yeah, no drought in Iowa, which follows the trend that I keep seeing week after week at the crop progress report that shows very little short to very short. In fact, no very short, very little short levels of moisture, soil moisture levels. But at the same time, as we move forward, is this dry down that we both hope for and expect when it comes to your typical fall weather in Iowa? Is it going to be enough to reduce those soil moisture levels? Because that could really impact a lot of the machinery out in the fields.
Yeah. So when you're squeezing out that moisture, you're lowering dew points in the air mass that's coming with this cold front that'll pass through tomorrow night into Saturday morning. You're going to get more atmospheric thirst. With more atmospheric thirst, lower dew points, lower relative humidity, that's where you can extract more moisture from topsoil and getting down into subsoils. What we need is wind too, and it's been pretty remarkable. Outside of thunderstorm activity, we haven't seen a lot of wind. And you look at these thunderstorms that pop up, no real steering flow. So they sit over one part of the state or one part of the region, and you get these 3-4 inch rainfalls in July, late June, and even in early August. So we're seeing a market shift in the pattern, and that should, along with the outlooks in September, October for warmer and drier conditions, those are the components that we need to come together to dry fields out, but also dry the grain out in the fields and use less propane, for example.
On a similar note, the aquifer. We needed a lot of rain to fill up that aquifer. In fact, I think it was a year's worth, essentially. Where are we now as that stands, just with all the rain we've gotten over the past 3 months?
Well, Dr. Keith Schilling, our state geologist, is the expert on aquifers and groundwater for the state, and he's doing a mapping of eastern Iowa aquifers. Given the longevity of the 20 to 2024 drought, 48 months, the fifth driest 48 months on record, which was preceded by the two wettest years on record, 2018 and 2019. For those deeper aquifers that, for example, the Jordan aquifers that you're extracting water for drinking for uses outside of human consumption, you're going to need several years, if not more than a decade, to fully replenish those aquifers, especially with a 4-year drought. Now, that being said, with how wet it's been this summer, we're really adding to those surpluses in the aquifers that we need to replenish fully. So if you were going to write a headline in terms of talking about groundwater and aquifer replenishment, this summer is exactly what you need to do that.
Justin, this may fall into the range of geology, but I've asked most of the questions I'm interested in right now, so I'm going to throw an off-the-wall question at you just because that's just how I am sometimes. Aquifer, we always talk about how it's not full enough. That's been the entire time that I've really known this business. What happens when the aquifer gets a little too full? What's the impacts there? Or has that happened? Can it happen?
So let me answer it through the guise of my expertise, and I'll try to venture out more geologically. The droughts that we've seen recently, 2012. 2020 through 2024, the preceding years prior to 2012 and, as I mentioned, 2020 were extremely wet years. So your soil profiles were at capacity, stream flows were elevated. You're getting more runoff into the system, more inputs into the aquifers. So you're able to store that water in times of dryness. And you get into 2011 through 2013, a widespread and more devastating drought than what we've seen since 1988. And that includes 2020 through 2024. We had record yields in 2021 and 2022, given the hybridization and the science behind the crop. Now, of course, we had hydrological impacts from a longevity drought, including diminishment of aquifer surpluses. But overall, I'm not sure if you can reach a capacity in an aquifer. And if you do, it probably has implications on more groundwater and shallow wells versus, you think of surface systems like streams and rivers. But we probably need a geologist to get a more fulsome answer on that.
Totally understand. I will have to follow that up with a geologist. My interest is piqued now. Justin Glisan is the state climatologist for the state of Iowa, and really glad to have you here, Justin, on Farm Here Daily. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, David.
This is Farm Here Daily. We'll have more conversations on the way, but first we're going to take a look at the marketplace. And there was green in the grains at the close on Thursday. September corn 7 1/4 cents higher, 3.87 1/4. December rising 7 3/4 at 4.11 3/4. Soybeans in September 19 1/2 cents up, 10.34 1/2, with November an increase of 20 cents, 10.56. Soybean meal in September $4.80 a ton in the green, $296.80. September wheat a penny and a half cents higher, 5.07, with December also a penny and a half more, 5.29 3/4. In the livestock market close for Thursday, October live cattle down 12 cents a hundredweight, 234.72. December falling a nickel, 236.40. Feeder cattle in September 7 cents a hundredweight weaker, 358.02, with October up 42 cents at 358.10. Lean hogs in October 2 cents a hundredweight down, $89.92, with December rising 12 cents, $83.10 a hundredweight. That is the Thursday market close. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we're going to discuss some of the market trends going on here with John King with the Ground Level Dispatch. And we've chatted with the folks at the Ground Level Dispatch a few times, but for those of you who do not know, the Ground Level Dispatch breaks down the markets twice a day. They give the farmers the essential information they need on grain prices and input costs, helping them make smarter marketing decisions. And if you're interested in cutting through the noise and knowing what matters, go to groundleveldispatch.com and subscribe today. We have a month free trial opportunity as well, and we can talk about that a bit later as well. John King joins us right now, and on the input side of the market, I really want to get into what's going on with the UAN. You had an email out this weekend. It's part of what you guys do. What's the deal there? What's happening in the fertilizer markets?
Yeah, I would say in general, the biggest thing that's been, I would call it new news, is that we had basically a week ago, a little over a week ago, we had CF Industries come to the market, I think on August 11th with I'd call it their annual summer fill program for UAN. A lot of times in my past, this program comes out anywhere from the last part of June to the middle of August, the first part of August, depending on what inventory levels are like. So kind of seeing it at the end of August was really good telltale sign to the industry that demand for this year's UAN product was pretty good. Obviously, the producers didn't have to come to market very early in order to clear inventory and start on next year's pricing. Definitely saw a lot of production being consumed all the way through the end of the year. I think the biggest thing for growers listening is, we saw that number come out at about $100 a ton more than what it was a year ago, which is, obviously with the current farm economy is surprising or scary, one or the other. And, I think that's the good thing that, for us is just trying to create a relative idea of what these farmers need to be understanding is coming at them for this growing season. And, not starting off on a great foot. We're starting $100 a ton higher on UAN, and we're starting $100 a ton higher on ammonia. When you look at those prices, I'd rather have $100 a ton more on ammonia than UAN just because of concentration. But it's not a great scenario when you look at the overall input process that we're going through right now for 26 crop. We got high phosphates, high UAN, high urea, relatively high ammonia. Just a lot of things that are kind of really not going the growers' way.
Now, that $100 a ton more number, could you give us a frame of reference of what that is over the last maybe 5 years or so? Is that making this much higher than those really high fertilizer prices we had with all the supply chain chain disruptions during the pandemic?
No, I wouldn't say so. It's probably still 40% less than that. It's just when we look at relative affordability for those products as we've seen throughout time, we're probably at affordability that we would have seen back then. When you look at relation to what this is priced at versus what that was there, we're looking at, I think I put it in over the weekend here. I'm going to look at it 7.8 units of nitrogen for a bushel of corn, which is historically the average is about 12.8 over the last 10 years. So we're pretty significantly below that average. A lot of the ways that I frame it up in the article is kind of really the 80th percentile or 20th percentile mark. Usually if we're operating within those two marks, we're somewhere in a relative, I'd call it a range of mean. But when you start getting below, I would call it what the 20th percentile is, which is about 9.7 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of corn. We really are kind of getting to that point where growers are going to defer price risk. Okay. And what I mean by that is they're either, and the market's always a function of, fertilizer prices go higher and grain stay stagnant, then obviously affordability is going down. If we see a rush on grain prices higher, it'll increase affordability because, right, you can, your end commodities worth more. But yeah, I mean, in general, it's a really tough place to be at right now with where we're looking at everything, and it's going to make the decision very tough for our customers on what to do. And I think a lot of them are just going to defer the risk. I put it out into my article. Obviously, we've seen a big swing on corn and bean acres from the USDA here recently, and one, from the pricing scenario and the inventory scenario, I think maybe the USDA is correct with this extra, corn acres that we have in the market because that's what drew down inventory so hard on really all nitrogens, especially UAN. The other thing is like, what's that do for bean acres next year, right? Like, there's a certain amount of ammonia that's going to go out this fall for guys that got to rotate that acre to corn, but the corn on corn acres are probably going to be somewhat stagnant until spring, in my opinion, to kind of see what's going on, where the market's at. It feels like there's more upside to beans. I've been driving around plenty here in the state of Iowa. My opinion is you get north of 20, there's a lot of bean fields that have pretty water damaged, from these late rains. So, I think there's upside in beans before there's upside in corn. I would hate to agree with the fact that there 188 bushels per acre out there from the USDA, but there's a lot of corn out there. I mean, there's just a lot of corn out there, and it's going to weigh on the market, and it's going to weigh on the market heavy here at fall.
Let's talk about the ROI then, because we know the game of farming is a game of margins, and you gotta go with as much as you can make. So you can't really say no to fertilizer, right? It's something you have to have on some aspect. Is there a potential backing up? I know the moment you open that bag, you're starting to lose yield. So there's a point at which you gotta have something or nothing. And are you estimating maybe folks put on a little bit less? Because I don't think I'm not sure it necessarily can work that way. Where are they going to cut to meet these types of investment needs?
It won't be on nitrogen, right? It won't be on nitrogen. I think the phosphorus market's in dire straits, looking for an identity and really a long term of what the S&D balance looks like that domestically, especially because with a lot of the tariff pressure, whether it's the anti-dumping tariffs that were enacted 5 years ago or the Trump reciprocal tariffs, the phosphate market's continually going to be broken in the United States. That's where growers will cut first because it's the least amount of impact they can see on a 1 year cut. They can buy themselves time to find some inventory, to let inventory keeping up. And honestly, and a lot of it globally for the phosphate market, prices are high trying to kill demand. I mean, we're literally trying to kill demand globally right now. So, I mean, that's some of it as well, is that I just think we're probably looking at a pretty big phosphorus cut. They won't cut on nitrogen, but what it's going to do to the market is, the farmer is going to be less likely to let go of that cash, right? In the key times of the year when he was usually booking fertilizer early, he's going to defer the risk, right? Like, prices already suck. Those rotated acres that I could flip either way, what's the point of displacing cash on those acres today versus buying yourself time? See what the market gives you, see what happens, and maybe globally demand gets figured out a little bit. That there's either a price decrease or we see an increase in commodity grain prices. So I mean, that's would be my recommendation is stuff's unaffordable today. Don't reward the market at really the least amount of affordability that we've seen. Buy yourself time and figure out what you want to do next spring. I mean, because again, the bean market might be hot next spring, or maybe it will tell you to plant more corn and do more corn on corn. But like today, when we start looking at 2026 break evens, it's pretty tough to justify. Um, Going straight to the bank to borrow money and then go pay your ag retailer on solution. I think for the guys that know they got to do fall ammonia from an operational standpoint, that's something you probably have to look at getting locked in. But even for P and K, again, I think the potash price is at a point where it's fairly affordable, or I would say it's fair. Um, I think there's guys that are going to opt out to, where they've got problem spots in their fields for overall potassium deficiency. That's where I would spend my money. I wouldn't be spending $80 an acre on phosphorus. I'd be spending I'd be cutting phosphorus and spending the rest of that money on something that's a little bit more relative.
John King is with the Ground Level Dispatch. And John, we have a link for a month free trial with you all. What is to be expected if someone were to give that link a click?
I think the biggest thing is that, we're trying to provide solutions and answers to farmers on stuff that maybe isn't always as relative. The biggest thing too is, Reese does a great job writing the daily notes on providing people with what's happening in the market so that you don't have to go out and dive through all this other stuff to figure it out. We try to make sure that we're giving as much time back to our readers every day to be effective and operational on their farm without trying to be market gurus. So that's what they're going to get. And they'll get some good stuff on the weekend to get them thinking about what they need to be doing.
John King, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Your Daily.
All right. Thanks, guys.
This is Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you again for listening. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.